We are thrilled to welcome Congressman Andy Kim. First, I'm going to start with a little background. Andy grew up in South Jersey, the proud son of Korean immigrants. He received a degree in political science from the University of Chicago, and then after an internship in government, went to Oxford University as a Rhodes Scholar, where he earned a doctorate in international relations, and went on to becoming a leading security expert. After receiving his degree, Kim returned to government service as a civilian advisor to Generals Petraeus and Allen in Iraq and Afghanistan. Under President Obama, he was director of Iraq at the National Security Council. Andy ran for office for the first time in 2018, and BlueWaveNJ worked very hard to help Andy defy the odds in New Jersey's 3rd District, a seat President Trump won by 6 points in 2016, and no Democrat has won more than once since the Civil War. On election night, Andy was trailing the GOP incumbent, but pulled ahead and won by 1.3% after the mail-in ballots were counted. 25,000 at least in Burlington and nearly 31,000 in Ocean. I just wanted to remind everyone of the importance in mail-in ballots and how it can make a difference. During his first term, Andy has been a strong progressive voice on BlueWaveNJ's issues, including women's rights, union rights, the environment, and healthcare. He has a 100% rating from both NARAL and Planned Parenthood, as well as many unions, including the AFL-CIO and CWA. Congressman Kim received a 97% rating from the League of Conservation Voters and was recently endorsed by the Brady Group to Prevent Gun Violence and the Council for a Livable World. He is a member of the House Armed Services Committee and the House Committee on Small Business, and recently was named to the 12-member bipartisan House Committee to oversee the coronavirus response. Thank you so much for coming tonight, Andy. It's a pleasure to see you, even on a Zoom call. I'd love to be able to shake your hand, but it's very nice to see you. Why did you decide to run for Congress, and what has been your biggest frustration and proudest moment since taking office? Also, what do you hope to achieve in your next term, assuming you win in November?
Yeah, thank you, Marcia. Thank you, everyone, for taking some time. It's a great honor to be able to be here. I remember the very first time I called Marcia out of the blue and tried to introduce myself to her and tell her that there's a race down in South Jersey that she should pay attention to. As she said, it was a really tough one. It was in this Trump +6 district. A lot of folks told us that it was impossible for us to be able to win this seat, to beat an incumbent that won by 20 points in a previous election, that had millions of dollars that he had spent in a previous race. And look, they also told me it was impossible for me as a Korean American to win in a district that has very few Korean Americans and is predominantly white district. But we were able to pull it off, and I'm really proud that this district that voted for Trump by 6 points just elected the very first Korean American Democrat in the history of our country. So on those notes, I just thank all of you for your help and support, and appreciate it immensely. For me, I ran for Congress because I'm somebody that deeply believes in service to our country. As Marcia mentioned, I've served my country my whole career. I was a career public servant, and I'm somebody that worked under both Republicans and Democrats. I served in Afghanistan, worked at the State Department, the Pentagon, and at the White House National Security Council. So those are, that's where I came from. But honestly, I'll be honest, I never thought that I'd run for Congress. I never was someone who thought about things in a political lens necessarily. I was a national security official, and really measured my life and my accomplishments based off of trying to save lives and trying to deal with these two great wars of our time, especially when I was at the White House. I served as the counter-ISIS coordinator there at the White House for 2 years, very much focused on what we can do to help our armed servicemen and women get through that really difficult time. But something happened with, with the 2016 election. I think a lot of us really came to understand that we can't assume that someone else is going to fight our fights for us. We can't assume that someone else will stand up and take on those mantles, take on these big fights. And when I come from a Trump +6 district with a congressman there who ended up becoming the lead author of the healthcare repeal bill, I just decided that that was too much. This was the district where I went to kindergarten. This is the district that raised me and my family. Just real quick to tell you my background, my mom and my dad grew up in South Korea at the end of the Korean War. My dad actually grew up in an orphanage. He's a polio survivor, lived homeless on the streets for much of his childhood. He ended up studying and getting an education, came to the United States for an education. My dad, who grew up in an orphanage in South Korea as a polio survivor, ended up getting a PhD in genetics here in America. That's what this country means to me and my family, and that's what we were fighting for. And when my congressman was leading the charge on trying to gut pre-existing condition protections, I thought that that was too much. I'm a dad of 2 kids, a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old, who you might hear outside the door as they're running around. But that was really it. So that's what I've been trying to continue on in my time in Congress, is to carry on that mission of trying to save lives, trying to continue the work that I did as a public servant. I'm really trying to think about this job no different than the other jobs that I had in government. While my other jobs were non-political jobs, I still believe that that is the cornerstone of our government, is public service. So while my job is inherently more political now as an elected official, I still try to carry on in that same manner, recognizing that I've sworn the same oath in my life 3 times to be able to defend and protect this Constitution. And that was, in fact, the same oath that I swore on the floor of the House of Representatives. And I think that that means a lot to people in this district that Trump carried by 6. We're the largest employer in the districts to join military base. And a lot of veterans, the largest veteran community in New Jersey is in my district. A lot of folks here know what it means to serve. A lot of folks here know what it means to serve in a nonpartisan way, and my job is to try to live that out. In terms of some of the proudest moments and some of the difficult moments of my first term, I'd say that some of my proudest moments were one of the most powerful moments that I had was being on the floor of the House of Representatives when we passed H.R. 8, universal background checks for gun safety. That was a really emotional experience. It was something that I care deeply about. Gun safety issue is one that has just become a defining issue for so many of us, as we're just trying to figure out how we can move past just the senseless violence that just continues to plague our country, and we're continuing to see that, over the last few days as well, and to be there and recognize that we did just pass it. And I remember the crowd above, which was surrounded by, in the gallery above the House, was filled with gun safety advocates and activists who have dedicated their lives. Many of them have lost loved ones due to gun violence, and that's why they were there. And all of a sudden, they erupted in applause when we crossed the threshold of votes. And I remember it was very empowering, because it reminded me that we can do this. We can pass these bills. It's just about getting the right people in Congress and in the White House to be able to do this. And that was an empowering moment to me, because over the last few years, I've kind of been beaten down on this issue of gun safety, where I just feel like sometimes I'm just like, it's too big of an issue, and the NRA and the problems that they created are too entrenched in our society. And it makes me wonder, is this actually possible? Is it actually possible to solve these problems in our country? And that day, when I saw what we could accomplish and I heard the applause from above, it really empowered me that we can get there, that we can do this, we can pass these bills, But it also reminded me of this line that I learned when I was younger, which is you don't have good government until you have good people working in government. And that's what this was about. That's what our race was about. That's what those challenges are about. But in terms of the tougher, difficult, frustrating parts is that, look, I'll tell you, every day I see the influence of special interest in our government. I see the power of big money in our politics. And I see, a lot of folks there that are really in it for themselves, in it for different reasons than I am in. And I see the just sheer amount of disinformation that is pushed out there, the lies and the attacks that happen. I experienced it in my campaign. My campaign ended up being the most expensive House race in New Jersey history, with around $25 million spent on our race, and a lot of that trying to push out lies about me and what I was stood for. But I see that every single day in Washington. And those are some of the systemic problems that we need to fix. We really need to be able to fix our politics, get the big money out of there, be able to have a system that's focused on the people. But as difficult as it is, I remain hopeful. And what I'll end by is just saying, I guess almost a year and a half into this job, I have to say I really do love this job. I really do love this opportunity to serve and serve and represent my hometown, the place where I did my entire kindergarten through 12 in the public school of this district, and where I'm now raising my 2-year-old and my 4-year-old. So it's a real honor to be a congressman here, and a real joy to be able to do this work.
You were one of the 12 members appointed to the Coronavirus Oversight Committee. Can you briefly describe the functions and what authority the committee has?
Yeah, happy to. So it's a real honor to serve on this select committee. So it's the Select Committee on the Coronavirus Crisis. There are only 12 members total, 7 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and we are in charge. We've been charged by the House of Representatives to have oversight over the coronavirus crisis response. This includes the CARES Act and the Paycheck Protection Program and the small business support. It includes the relief checks and other aspects of the programs to be able to help steer us through this. But it isn't just about, so we will be looking into the challenges where big companies were jumping to the front of the line and in front of other small businesses and taking up those resources that were there for the most vulnerable. It's also going to look into some of the federal contracts that were out there for personal protective equipment and other contracts that were given to companies that had no business doing this type of work. And we see a lot of examples where some of these contracts yielded out counterfeit N95 masks and other things like that constitute fraud, waste, and abuse. But this committee is also looking forward in terms of how we safely and responsibly reopen, how we prepare for a second wave that we expect later on this year and try to get ahead of that curve, and also trying to supercharge towards a vaccine so that we can try to get there as soon as possible, but also think about how we're going to manage not just the development of the vaccine, but also the distribution of the vaccine, and also try to come up with a strategy to answer the question, which is how do you distribute 300 million doses of a vaccine? Who gets it first? And that's going to be potentially an issue that could tear our country apart if not done strategically. If people think that people are getting access to the vaccine first because of political connections, or if it's the wealthiest that are getting it first, this is something that can't be stayed for. It really is something that has to be done fairly and has to be done strategically. So those are some of the big questions that we're going to be focused on. But as you mentioned, I'm honored to be on this committee. I'm the only first or second term member of Congress on the Democrat side to be in this committee. Most of the other members have been there for a very long time and are very senior members. Like the chairman of the committee is Jim Clyburn, the number 3 Democrat in Congress. The top on the Republican side is Steve Scalise, the number 2 Republican in Congress. So you see how high it is. The other members are, Maxine Waters, Chair of Finance, Carolyn Maloney, Chair of Oversight, Nydia Velasquez, Chair of Small Business. These are some of my colleagues there. The reason I was asked to join is because of my national security background. The speaker and other leadership, when they asked me, and frankly, I was surprised when they asked me, but they reminded me that my previous job was as the counter-ISIS coordinator at the White House. My job was to run a crisis response unit out of the Situation Room for 18 months, organizing and managing a whole of government response to a national security crisis. So while that is different than a pandemic experience, I know what the White House is like under crisis, and I've seen the potential of that building and what it can get done. So I hope to be able to utilize that experience and expertise and be able to help with our response to the coronavirus crisis.
Thank you. I'm going to the audience questions. This is from the chat room, Gabriella. He says, thank you for this opportunity. And can you, Congressman, relate to the increasing numbers in the hungry and food insecure population, especially children, and especially in times of record unemployment and the current crisis? The Hill passed SNAP and other food program supports in the HEROES Act. But what if the Senate doesn't pass it? What measures can be taken? And how can grassroots groups help and individuals help?
Yeah, I'm really glad you raised this question. The issue about hunger is one that just gets to the core of who we are and the struggles that we have. As I mentioned, my father grew up homeless in an orphanage and then subsequently homeless on the streets of Korea when he was younger. My first job in politics was to work as an organizer at the Chicago Coalition of the Homeless, and dealing with a lot of issues of those that are food insecure, hungry, those that don't have shelter for them to be under. So these are issues that I've been working with really my whole life here. Our district in New Jersey 3 continues to struggle with this. Even before the coronavirus crisis, we had over 18,000 children in my congressional district that are considered food insecure every day, which means they go to bed hungry every night. That is unacceptable. Just the sheer struggles that we are having as a community, as a country, is something that's heartbreaking here. And the coronavirus crisis has exacerbated that. Even before this crisis, we had 40% of Americans who couldn't handle a $400 emergency. And that was a statistic that I talked about, others did. But we're now seeing that in full effect across our country right now with regards to this crisis that we're in. And we see just how many people are struggling. Just the other day, I was getting calls from different constituents, and I was put in touch with a young woman who called me and told me that she didn't have enough to eat that night, and she would potentially lose the roof over her head the day after. And she wasn't able to get unemployment insurance help and wasn't sure how to get on her feet. It was just heartbreaking, and we're trying to connect her with resources. I ended up just myself going through my own fridge and my own pantry and putting together resources for her, food for her, and driving it over to her just to be able to hold her over. I just couldn't bear to see that she was having that type of trouble and feeling so vulnerable. Nobody should have to go hungry. Nobody in our country, we're the richest, most powerful country in the world. There's no reason why anyone in our country should be hungry. The SNAP program benefits and the expansion of that is a step. And the help that we've done with unemployment insurance, trying to help support people through this time, it's a step forward, but we still know that people are falling between the cracks. And for Mitch McConnell and others to say that this is not something that they want to continue on, that they are saying that this is not something that is necessary, I find that to be heartbreaking. I find it to be disgusting, because they are the same party that is criticizing us for a multi-trillion-dollar aid package to those that are most vulnerable, saying that that's too much. We can't be doing that to our economy. This is the same party that just 2 years ago led a multi-trillion-dollar tax cut to the biggest corporations and the wealthiest Americans. I didn't see them at that time talking about fiscal responsibility and talking about what it is that we can do to help our deficit. Why is it that they're okay giving the wealthiest Americans and the biggest corporations these major tax cuts, but when it comes to just asking for some basic food and resources to those most at need, that they say the line is drawn, we can't do that? So this is something that I will keep pushing on. In fact, I did a town hall this morning with my district with targeting some of the most vulnerable and and fiscally ones that are struggling the most fiscally, did a town hall with them about how they can reach out to resources with nonprofits, with other groups, grassroots organizations when it comes to food and hunger and housing and mental health issues, having great organizations like New Jersey Citizen Action and other organizations on there to be able to help provide resources about food pantries and others. So I am trying to mobilize everything we have at our disposal towards this. I will fight tooth and nail to be able to help support additional resources at a federal level. I engage with the governor daily about these issues about hunger and those that are most vulnerable. And I'm trying to mobilize a coalition of grassroots organizations, nonprofits, charities, religious institutions, and others to be able to look out for folks as best as we can. So if that's something that we can work with you all about and other issues, I'm happy to do so.
Okay, we're getting a lot of questions. This one's anonymous, but he says, as a member of the small business community, how do you think that our government can help support arts organizations such as museums, small orchestras, and arts organizations that might not be able to open for the rest of the year?
Yeah. Look, well, first of all, it's about recognizing the importance of the arts and the importance of these types of institutions. I'm somebody who is classically trained as a cellist, was a musician for much of my life, tried to dabble in filmmaking. My mom does painting and poetry. Arts has been a part of my life. And I think first and foremost, we as a society need to recognize that this is not just like a nice to have. The arts is not just like some type of extracurricular that we can participate in once we achieve a certain amount of comfort as a society. This is a fundamental part of our society. It is part of what makes America America and makes us so proud of living in this incredible country. And I think it's important that we think about it in that type of way. And I see this problem not just about what is happening with the coronavirus, but we see this battle every single day when it comes to arts programs in public schools. When we see this in terms of funding for the National Endowment for the Arts and other aspects of our arts community. So this is something where we need to make sure that we stand up and talk about the significance of this. That talk about the impacts of this and recognize that this isn't, again, just some kind of dressing on top or some icing on the cake. This is a fundamental part of our society. So it starts with that. And the reason why I start there is I find that so much of the battles that I have about supporting the arts comes down to those types of arguments in Congress. And some of my colleagues that just simply don't share that same belief that I have about the necessity that the arts play in our community, in our society. So therein lies a huge part of it. Beyond that, we do need to mobilize this and treat these, try to treat these organizations with that type of respect. Try to be able to help out to different types of loan programs and support programs and grant programs. We have been moving forward on some of these, but we know that some of the challenges that we face when it comes to the arts and entertainment is that these are oftentimes going to be the types of sectors of our society and our economy that may very well be at the very end of the line in terms of recovery. When we think about going to a concert or to going to movie theaters, going to Broadway shows, going to live performances, going to art museums and galleries, these are probably going to be some of the parts of our community and society that will have the most struggle in terms of getting back on their feet, in terms of having customers feel comfortable and safe going and taking part in this. And that's going to be a huge problem. So I want to see more investment, both in terms of helping keep these different organizations going, but also investments in terms of digital technology and other types of opportunities to help them try to find a new platform. Because it's not simply that we can have the arts go dark for X number of months or years. We need to help them find new audiences and recognize that there may be ways here where they can connect in with people digitally and find ways to keep expressing themselves and keep finding ways to be able to share their talents with our community. And so those are some of the things that I'm trying to do right now, both from the small business committee that I'm on, but also just more broadly through some of the work we're trying to do with some of these relief packages going forward.
I want to turn to two questions by Kelly McDonald. As a former national security official, what can you tell us about the ability of critical security infrastructure to survive the assault from this administration?
Can you say the critical, can you say that again?
Okay, she says, she said critical security infrastructure.
Yeah, okay, yeah, happy to.
Survive the assault by the Trump administration. And I'm going to ask the second question, which, I don't know, what are you hearing from people in your district who voted for Trump? Do they still support him?
So here's what I'll say is that, you know, when I was thinking back on the first question you asked, Marcia, you know, you were asking some of the things that frustrated me most about my first term. One of the things I was thinking about saying was about the crisis that we had at the beginning of this year with Iran, and the president's very, in my opinion, reckless decision to so carelessly move forward with the assassination of an Iranian general put us very much at the brink of war. We were able to literally dodge a bullet there and sort of move forward, but the threat still remains, and it's something that I worry about immensely. But you know, that's a huge part of the problem here is just how this president continues this knee-jerk reaction when it comes to national security. He doesn't have experts in the room. He's not consulting them. He's not utilizing the resources of our operation here. And as a career public servant, as someone who served in these different capacities, it worries me greatly. I'd love to say that there are safeguards enough to be able to prevent this president from making some of the reckless decisions, but what we've seen so far is far and few between, especially when the president starts to surround himself with a cabinet, a national security cabinet, that is very much got a lot of other people from that echo chamber, like Pompeo, like a national security advisor that is just echoing whatever the president says. There are not people there that are willing to stand up. People that I worked with before, I had the great honor to be able to work with in different capacities. HR General McMaster, General Mattis, and others who I felt like were still at least the adults in the room on that front. This really pushes the institutions of our national security infrastructure to the limits here, and makes me try to think about what other safeguards we need to put in place. You see this with what's happened with the inspector generals right now, and the firing on that front. We saw this with the Ukraine episodes over the last couple months as that unfolded with impeachment. So what I'm trying to think through is what do we put into place in the future going forward to try to safeguard some of these categories. I think some of it is about some of our most dangerous assets, like nuclear weapon stockpiles. These are some places where I'm working in the Armed Services Committee to try to put into place more fail-safe mechanisms so that a president doesn't have the ability to just make rash decisions that could end up resulting in the deaths of countless people. And some of those types of safeguards are things that we're looking at right now and trying to figure out what we can have. But ultimately, what we need to do is really bolster up and bring back these institutions, reinforce them, whether they are our intelligence communities or our foreign service. A lot of these institutions have been hollowed out by this president. I have known countless diplomats that I worked with, career diplomats that served under presidents of both parties, and they were either fired or just pretty much pressured to leave or given no other choice to be able to do so. I'm trying to find ways that when this president is finally out of office, we can bring a lot of that staff back. So I'm trying to come up with legislative mechanisms that will allow us to rehire some of the civil servants and foreign service officers and others that left and be able to bring them back, because we really need to have them. career public servants, they are our steady hand at the wheel. They're what allows us to continue as a country despite the pendulum swings of our partisanship. And those are some of the institutions that I think we need to rebuild and restore. Otherwise, this hollowing out that the president has done would continue for decades to come, and we will continue to suffer from that experience if we're not able to rebuild as quickly as possible. And we will suffer from that type of legacy in the same way that we'll continue to suffer due to the judicial appointments that this president and Mitch McConnell have been able to push through. Those are just challenges and obstacles that we'll have to deal with for decades to come, unfortunately. So we're trying to minimize that type of damage, rebuild our institutions, and recognize that our government and our democracy needs to be bigger than any single individual, no matter what office they hold.
Amen to that. I'm now going to Barbara's question. She's a registered nurse, and I'm just finding here. She says, thank you for supporting the ACA. Can you address the need to fully enforce the Defense Production Act in order to awarding more than a few Fortune 500 companies to make the N95 masks? They're not enough for nurses and healthcare workers. It's not an adequate supply.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest issues.
Companies are awarded the ability to make that.
Yeah, this is one of the biggest issues that I work with on the Select Committee on the coronavirus crisis is about our supplies. As I mentioned, one of the charges that I'm tasked with was just about preparing for a second wave. And through this effort, I'm doing a lot of work about just how much PPE, how much personal protective equipment is our country consuming right now? What are we going through? What do we have? And what we realize, I mean, no surprise to all of you probably, but there is no accounting of this. There is no understanding of how much personal protective equipment our country needs, how much we've been consuming. There is no accounting of how much we're producing domestically, how much we're getting from abroad. And as a result, we just are scrambling constantly. And the chaotic system that puts states and municipalities fighting against each other, just raising the prices in their bids against each other. This has just been total chaos, and we've become our own worst enemy in some ways when it comes to trying to obtain this equipment. So first and foremost, we need to understand what is it that we need. Where are our stockpiles? What do we need to do to be able to have an abundance of this produced right now so we can rebuild our stockpiles in case there is a second wave later on this year. And that type of problem of accounting, that type of problem of thinking through the strategy here, working together to see what exactly we need, causes huge problems. Because when we think about the Defense Production Act, how do we know what we actually need to produce when we don't actually even know what we have and we don't actually know what we need? So it causes this huge problem where you end up just kind of pulling numbers out of a hat, and that's exactly what this administration has done. And we also need to make sure that those contracts are going to companies that can fulfill them, companies that can produce these at quality. As we said, we've had some federal contracts that have produced counterfeit masks and counterfeit personal protective equipment, which isn't just waste, it also puts lives at risk. It puts people at risk thinking that they have a quality product that they don't have, and could very well lead to them getting infected. So you're absolutely right. We want to make sure that we have this. We want to make sure that we spread it out and don't just put all of our production into, just a handful of companies. That is, again, no way to build a resilient supply chain. And we've seen the problems of this when it came to what happened once China's supply chain started to go down and how that had a global domino effect. We need to have a resilient system. We need to make sure that we are doing this in a coordinated and calculated way, and that we're doing this in a way that prepares us for the worst, even though we can try to hope for the best.
I want to go to a constituent of yours, Anthony, and see if I can find it again. Here it is. He says, thank you for taking the time to be here. I live in NJ3 and I'm currently unemployed and left out of the last CARES Act payment. Do you support a $2,000 a month payment to all citizens? We need universal programs and not means-tested programs that leave people behind. If you don't, what do you support if you don't support the 2,000? And what about extending unemployment benefits?
Yeah, look, we certainly want to extend the unemployment benefits. Some of the problems with some of the concerns that I had about some of these proposals are just the automatic reoccurring is that a lot of my colleagues that were pushing this weren't really explaining to me how this fits in. Does that mean that then we are getting rid of the unemployment insurance? Does this mean that we're going to be providing the small business support that we're doing? And I think that that's what leaves this kind of vulnerable out there. So I certainly want to see as much resources going to those that need it most. I struggle with the idea right now of giving a certain amount of money to every American. I think that we should be finding ways to target those that are most in need. I agree that we don't necessarily mean to go through means testing to be able to accomplish that, but I do think that we can be targeted about this. We have very good data about who's getting support and who's not, very good data about who doesn't have a job and who does, and trying to find a precision way to be able to do this. The CARES Act was meant to be a blunt effort here, trying to get it as wide as possible, and I'm sorry that you were not able to get the support that you need, and I'm happy to work with you to try to figure out what it is that didn't catch you and why it is you weren't able to get support, as we did try to have as wide of an approach as possible. So please follow up with me afterwards. But when it comes to getting the relief out there as soon as possible to those that most need it, I really think that we know who are the people that are struggling the most. I think trying to target that to them makes the strongest case. I think trying to open it up and say that every American should get it actually hurts our ability to get this past a Republican Senate and a Republican-held White House, and allows them greater space to just try to think that we are trying to use this opportunity to push other agendas. I think we have a stronger ability to focus it in on those that are most vulnerable, and makes it harder for them to resist those. So at least that's my approach. I'm not saying that I know everything about this and that I know all the right answers. We need to have a lot of humility in our approach right now, where we all recognize we are in unprecedented situations, and no single American, no single elected official has all the answers and knows all the best solutions to this. So I'm always open to have those types of conversations.
Well, I was told that you have a hard stop coming up, so I'll save some of my next questions to the fundraiser we're going to have for you. But I do want to ask you, you have another tough race in November. Given that the race is considered one of only 16 Democratic toss-ups in the country, according to the Cook Report, I'm sure that the GOP, as well as dark money groups and special interests, are going to be pouring millions of dollars into this race to try to win it back. What is your strategy for beating your challenger, and how can BlueWaveNJ help?
Yeah. Well, look, I appreciate the question. I appreciate all your help and support. I appreciate being able to do this event with you. So I definitely am from a really tough district. It's a Trump +6 district. It's the highest of any seat that a Democrat controls in New Jersey in terms of a district that Trump won. In fact, my district voted for Trump at a higher margin than Jeff Van Drew's district, and we all know what happened on that front. So it's a really tough place to operate within. And as you mentioned, if reelected, I'll be the first Democrat reelected to this seat since before the Civil War. So this has just been a place that has just a long history of this type of conservative lean. I feel like we have the right strategy and the right approach. Today's town hall was my 21st town hall. 18 of those were in person, going all over the district, going to some of the most conservative towns and showing up and showing that we're working hard for them. So that is the approach that we're taking. We're continue to hustle. show folks that I'm a workhorse, not a show horse. I'm trying to get things done for the district, deliver for the Joint Military Base through the Armed Services Committee, deliver for our small businesses, and be able to take this type of professionalism when it comes to these national security efforts. So, that's the message that we're doing. Now where it's about how do we get that message out there? So certainly your help when it comes to fundraising would be important. I still don't know who my challenger is, but there's a good potential that it could be a wealthy self-funder who is something that I've gone up against before, and I know how difficult it is when someone is able to just throw down a lot of money on their own, several $1 million just to be able to throw down. Whereas for me, I'm building up my resources through the grassroots, building up through the same way that we did last time around with these small dollar contributions and getting folks to help out. As the most vulnerable member of Congress from New Jersey this time around, I'm just asking folks from all over the state to really try to triage here and think about where their dollar can go the furthest. With this race being so difficult, they've already spent about $1 million against me already in attack ads and digital ads and TV ads over the last half year or so. So it just shows how much they're prioritizing this. And they put in reservations for several $1 million in the Philadelphia media market, which is mostly earmarked towards going after me and going after this race. To reiterate that what Marcia said, I won by the shortest of margins. I was 2,500 votes down on election night. 9 days later, we pulled it off with a margin of victory about 1 point. But if you look at that, I won by 3,973 votes. Not that I memorized it. With a third-party conservative candidate taking 3,902 votes. So if that third-party conservative wasn't in and that went to my opponent, it could have been just 71 votes that separated this race. So I say that because so many of you helped us knock on 71 doors. I know Marcia came down a number of times. You helped us call 71 people. You helped us raise enough money to communicate to at least 71 people through TV ads, digital ads, mailers. So I'm just asking for your continued help and support here. If you can contribute and help support us, especially if you can do it before the primary, which allows us to go into the general election as strong as possible. If you can help us with phone banking that we're continuing to do right now. We have a lot of really innovative phone banking opportunities that we have going on. And to try to commit to making sure that if we can have an in-person field operation, if you can come down and help us out, these are the types of things that we really can do. Given that I'm right next door to Philadelphia, I worry that a lot of the energy is going to go across the river over to try to help flip Pennsylvania, which is obviously a critically important swing state. I get it. I'm really worried about this as well, and I really want to make sure we can win Pennsylvania. But I also want us to make sure that we take care of our home here. We take care of our own. I'm really humbled to have this opportunity. I'm only 37 years old. If all goes well, hopefully I can be someone who can be a leader for New Jersey for decades to come. But a lot of that potential goes away if I'm not able to pull this off this coming November, especially going into a redistricting cycle. Being able to win this time round means all the more important. So I just ask you to keep that in mind as you're thinking about where your dollar is going to go best. I hope you keep in mind that effort. And the last thing I'll just say is I hope you keep in mind the work that I'm doing on this select committee. Again, I'm humbled and honored that Speaker Pelosi and others named me to this committee. It means a lot to me that they entrust me with this responsibility. But it also means that I just don't have as much time as I otherwise would for fundraising and making calls and doing these types of political types of events. So while I'm doing this work, what I promised the speaker is that I give it everything I got. And this is not a job that I want to half-ass. You've really got to make sure we do this right, given what's at stake. And I'm sure all of you would want me to give this committee work everything I have as well, given what's at stake. So I just ask you to just keep that in mind as you're thinking about what you can do to help support. And hopefully you can get my back while I do that important work. So thank you, Marcia. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Before everyone leaves, I want to say, put this date on your calendar. It's going to be June 12th. All right, starting at 5:45 for general attendance, a reception, a fundraiser. And it's critical that we help Andy raise money. Again, that's June 12th. You will get a flyer, this flyer, in your inbox and emails. It was sent to you right, I think, during this presentation. You quoted earlier saying, you don't have good government until you have good people. That's so true, but I also want to change it until you have good leaders. Colin McCann said, a good leader is someone that can turn empathy into action. And you were one of the few that does that constantly in your job. Thank you. Much appreciated. Take care, Andy.
I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch. Stay safe.